I never meant to keep my success hidden. That was never part of the plan. Yet after 10 long years of enduring my family's laughter and sideways glances whenever I mentioned my career, I had grown used to the quiet irony of it all. There I was, living in my private penthouse overlooking Central Park, running one of the most powerful tech companies in the country, while my family still believed I was their underachieving middle child, wasting my life on freelance tech work. My name is Olivia Winters, though the world knows me differently. To the business world, I am L.W. Blackwood, the elusive founder and CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a name that inspires admiration, fear, and mystery in equal measure. But to my family, I'm still just Olivia, the daughter who stubbornly refused to join the family law firm, the one who turned down the safe path for something as ridiculous, in their eyes, as software development. It was on an ordinary morning that everything began to shift. I sat in my private office on the top floor of Blackwood Tower, sunlight spilling across polished marble floors, scanning the latest acquisition reports when the door burst open. My assistant, Michael, usually the picture of composure, entered with a look I hadn't seen before, somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "Ms. Winters," he said carefully, "you need to see these job applications." He placed a tablet in front of me, the digital glow reflecting off his cufflinks. "They just came through HR." I took one sip of my coffee, glanced down, and nearly choked. Right there on the screen, perfectly formatted and neatly submitted, were the resumes of my sister, Diane Winters, and my brother, James Winters. My own siblings had applied for executive positions at Blackwood Innovations. "Is this a joke?" I asked, still staring at the screen. "There's more," Michael replied, scrolling through to another document. "Your father's law firm, Winters & Associates, is pitching legal services to our corporate department. The meeting's scheduled for next week." For a long moment, I just leaned back in my chair and let the memories wash over me. It had been 10 years since that fateful dinner when I tried to tell my family about my dream. I just graduated from college with a degree in computer science, full of ideas and ambition, eager to share my vision for a new kind of software architecture that could revolutionize enterprise systems. But my father barely looked up from his legal briefs. "Tech startups are a dime a dozen," he said, his tone dismissive, the way only a successful attorney can sound when he's already decided you're wrong. "Winters & Associates has been a respected law firm for 3 generations. That's real success, not this coding nonsense." Diane, ever the golden child and already a junior partner at the firm, laughed softly. "Come on, Dad. Let her play with her computers. When she fails, we can always hire her as IT support." James, the youngest, had at least tried to sound supportive, though even that carried a trace of condescension. "Maybe you could build us a better website for the firm," he'd said, as if that were the pinnacle of innovation. I'd smiled politely that night, pushing the disappointment deep down, realizing I would never convince them to believe in me. So I stopped trying. Instead, I took the little savings I had, borrowed against my trust fund, and threw myself into work, quietly, obsessively, secretly. I spent the next few years in a cramped apartment, taking small freelance gigs to pay the bills while building my dream company in the shadows. Those early years were brutal, nights blurred into mornings, failures stacked higher than successes, and yet I kept going. Every family gathering was another test of patience. So, still doing that freelance thing, they'd ask with mock sympathy, their smiles dripping with condescension. What they never knew was that my so-called freelance thing was a mask. Behind it, I was designing systems that would soon reshape global business infrastructure. The company I built, Blackwood Innovations, would go on to redefine enterprise architecture, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence. By the 5th year, we were valued at over $2 billion. By the 8th, we went public. My personal worth eclipsed every law firm my family ever idolized combined. But I never told them. I kept the illusion alive, still visiting them in that small, modest apartment I'd kept for appearances. Still driving my old Honda to family dinners while my real cars, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and a custom Aston Martin, sat hidden in a private garage. They pitied me, and I let them. It was easier that way. Now, staring at their job applications, I felt something unexpected, a strange cocktail of satisfaction, disbelief, and nostalgia. Part of me wanted to hit reject immediately, to give them a taste of the dismissal they'd served me all those years ago. But another part, the strategist in me, recognized a far more poetic opportunity. "Michael," I said finally, my voice calm but steady, "schedule the interviews. But not in the executive suite. Use the small conference room on the 15th floor. He blinked, clearly surprised. "The one we use for junior positions?" "Exactly," I replied. "And don't tell them they're meeting with L.W. Blackwood. Let them think it's just middle management." After he left, I opened my laptop and began digging into their recent careers. Diane had left our father's firm 2 years ago after a failed attempt to modernize their practice. James, it seemed, had drifted between several firms, never quite meeting expectations. Now, both were seeking refuge in the same tech world they once mocked. A notification lit up my phone, a text from Diane. "Hey, sis. Just applied to this amazing tech company. Put in a good word if you know anyone there, winking face. I stared at the message for a long time, a wry smile tugging at my lips. For 10 years, she hadn't once asked about my work or shown the slightest interest in technology. But now that she needed something, suddenly my connections mattered. "I'll see what I can do," I texted back, smiling at the irony. Because tomorrow, for the first time in a decade, everything would change. That night, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, watching the city lights shimmer like scattered stars. The skyline of Manhattan glittered with stories of ambition and power, and mine was about to take center stage. On my desk sat an old photograph, me in my cap and gown, smiling beside a family already dismissing my potential. I touched the edge of that photo, remembering how desperate I had once been for their pride. But tomorrow, they would finally see me for who I had become, not the disappointment they pitied, but the empire builder they never saw coming. Morning arrived, draped in quiet anticipation. I woke before dawn, my mind clear, my purpose sharp. Today wasn't just another day at Blackwood Innovations, it was the day everything came full circle. The city below my penthouse buzzed awake as I sipped my espresso, watching sunlight creep over the skyline. My reflection in the glass felt like that of a stranger, no longer the girl desperate for validation, but the woman who had built an empire brick by digital brick. By 8, I was in my office, the familiar hum of productivity filling the air. My assistant, Michael, entered with his usual precision, carrying his tablet. "Ms. Winters," he said, "your siblings' interviews are confirmed for 10 a.m. Your father's firm pitch is still scheduled for 2. He hesitated, glancing up. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I turned from the window, smiling faintly. "I've waited 10 years for this day, Michael. I've never been more certain of anything." He nodded, though the flicker of curiosity in his eyes betrayed his professional calm. I spent the next hour reviewing some internal reports, though I barely absorbed a word. My thoughts drifted constantly to that first family dinner, to the countless times I'd swallowed their judgment and let them think I was failing. I wasn't bitter anymore. What I felt now was something deeper, quieter, a kind of closure that comes from knowing you've already won. At 9:30, I walked to the observation deck connected to my private office and looked down through the transparent glass wall that faced the lower floors. Somewhere below, the small conference room on the 15th floor was being prepared exactly as I had instructed. No panoramic view, no luxurious furnishings, just a plain table, 2 chairs, and a single pot of coffee. Nothing that would hint at the true power of Blackwood Innovations. When the security feed came online, I watched the lobby cameras. At precisely 9:45, Diane arrived first, right on schedule. Even through the grainy feed, she radiated self-assurance. Her tailored navy suit was sharp, her heels clicked with purpose, and her expression carried that familiar mix of entitlement and charm she used in courtrooms. 5 minutes later, James entered. He looked nervous, tugging at his tie and checking his reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, his confidence clearly less intact. Watching them both, I felt a strange ache in my chest, memories of childhood, of simpler days before pride built walls between us. But that softness passed quickly. They were escorted upstairs, neither of them having any idea that their freelance sister was watching from the executive suite above. At 10 sharp, the door to the small conference room closed, and the first interviewer stepped in. I had chosen Sarah Chen, my chief technology officer, a brilliant woman in her early 30s who had built entire systems that powered Fortune 100 companies. She was everything my siblings had dismissed all their lives: young, female, and utterly formidable. Through the speakers, I could hear Sarah's calm, precise voice. "Good morning. I'm Sarah Chen, conducting your preliminary interviews for Blackwood Innovations. Let's begin with your technical backgrounds." Diane straightened, crossing one leg over the other. "While I don't have direct experience in technology, I've overseen multiple digital transformation initiatives for law firms." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That sounds interesting. Could you elaborate on the technical aspects of those projects?" There was a long pause, just long enough for Diane's confidence to falter. She began stringing together corporate jargon, trying to mask her lack of real understanding. I almost pitied her. Almost. James's turn wasn't much better. He spoke of his familiarity with tech ecosystems and adaptability to innovation, but the moment Sarah asked him about blockchain infrastructure or API integration, he fumbled like a rookie. After 20 painfully awkward minutes, Sarah thanked them politely and exited, leaving my siblings exchanging uneasy glances. Their faces were pale, their earlier confidence slipping fast. "Send in round 2, I instructed through the earpiece. This time, it was Marcus Rodriguez, my head of innovation, a sharp, confident man who thrived on creative intelligence. He opened his folder and smiled easily. "Let's talk about your views on emerging technologies, cryptocurrency, AI, quantum computing. What do you see as the future of business integration?" Their answers were a symphony of buzzwords and half-formed opinions. Diane used digital transformation at least 5 times without explaining what it meant. James mentioned blockchain but couldn't define it. Marcus kept his tone polite, though I saw the corner of his mouth twitch in amusement. Halfway through, Diane's patience snapped. "Is this some kind of test?" she demanded. "We're here for executive positions, not technical interviews. When do we meet the actual decision-makers? Where is this O.W. Blackwood person?" Marcus maintained his professional tone. "Ms. Winters, this is standard hiring procedure. But of course, if you'd prefer to withdraw." "No," James interrupted quickly, his voice strained. "We're fine. Please, continue." 3 more interviewers followed, each from different departments: finance, communications, and research. By the end, both Diane and James looked thoroughly defeated. Their arrogance had crumbled into confusion. Diane's once perfect hair was slightly out of place. James sat slouched, his earlier composure gone. Watching them, I felt no cruelty, only an odd, poetic justice. They were finally facing the kind of scrutiny I had endured all my life, only now the tables had turned. Michael's voice buzzed softly in my earpiece. "Ms. Winters, your father's legal team has arrived for their pitch." I smiled faintly, my pulse steady. Perfect timing. "Have them wait in the main conference room. I'll handle it personally." Switching off the monitors, I stood, smoothing the fabric of my tailored black suit. 10 years of silence, of patience, of letting them underestimate me had all led to this moment. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls, calm, poised, unstoppable. When the doors opened onto the 15th floor, the room fell silent. The door to the small conference room stood ajar, and I could hear Diane and James whispering inside, their voices tight with anxiety. I pushed the door open. The expression on their faces was everything I had imagined: confusion first, then recognition, then shock that seemed to steal the breath right out of them. "Olivia," Diane stammered. "What are you doing here? We're in the middle of interviews." I walked in slowly, letting the moment settle. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and calm, "you're at the end of your interviews. And they haven't gone well." James's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? How would you know that?" I let a small smile play across my lips. "Because," I said simply, "I own this company." They both froze. "I am O.W. Blackwood." The silence that followed was absolute, so thick you could almost hear their hearts beating. Diane's mouth opened but no words came. James's hand tightened on the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. "That's impossible," Diane finally whispered. You're a freelancer. You work out of coffee shops. I laughed softly, the sound echoing in the small room. No, Diane. That's just what I let you believe. I looked around the room, the modest furnishings, the ordinary walls, the faint hum of air conditioning, and it struck me how fitting it was. This plain space was the perfect stage for truth. While you were pitying my choices, I continued, I was building this. Blackwood Innovations. A Fortune 500 company worth more than every law firm in New York combined. James stared at me as if seeing a ghost. All these years. Yes, I said, meeting his eyes. All these years, while you mocked my coding nonsense, I was revolutionizing enterprise software. While you bragged about your legal victories, I was closing billion-dollar deals. While you saw failure, I was creating legacy. Diane's face turned pale. Why didn't you tell us? I smiled, a quiet, bittersweet smile. Why should I? When was the last time any of you showed interest in my work? When did you ever listen without judgment? I laid their resumes gently on the table. Now you're applying for jobs here. Not because you're passionate or qualified, but because you heard this company was the next big thing. I paused, letting the weight of silence fill the air. I think it's time you both learned what real success looks like. The air in the room felt heavier than stone, thick with disbelief and the slow dawning of humiliation. My brother and sister sat frozen, their faces pale and speechless. For a brief moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity, but it vanished just as quickly as it came. Before I could say anything more, the intercom on the wall buzzed softly. My assistant's calm voice followed, steady as ever. Ms. Winters, Mr. Blackwood and his legal team are waiting in the executive boardroom. Mr. Blackwood. My father. The words echoed in my chest, stirring something deep, not fear, not anger, but an old ache that never quite healed. Thank you, Michael, I replied, keeping my tone even. I'll be right there. I turned back to my siblings. You can both wait here, I said, collecting the thin folder from the table. Maybe use the time to reflect. I think perspective will serve you better than pride. Without waiting for a reply, I walked out. The click of my heels against the marble floors seemed to mark the rhythm of years reclaimed, every step a reminder of how far I'd come from that small, trembling version of myself who once begged her family to believe in her dreams. As the elevator carried me upward to the top floor, the glass walls revealed the city sprawling endlessly below, the same city where I had once struggled to afford rent, where I'd worked through nights just to prove to myself that I could matter without their approval. Now the skyline looked different. It wasn't intimidating anymore. It was mine. When the elevator doors opened, the boardroom loomed before me, vast, sleek, and flooded with sunlight. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by his team of lawyers, each of them neatly suited and alert. He looked older than I remembered, silver hair brushed back, face etched with the kind of lines that only come from too many victories and too few regrets. He rose slowly when he saw me, his expression unreadable. Olivia, he said finally, his voice smooth and measured. I wasn't expecting to see you here. I smiled politely, walking to the opposite end of the table. You should have, Father. This is my company. A ripple of shock went through the room, the lawyers exchanging quick glances, their pens pausing mid-note. My father's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his composure remained impeccable. Your company, he repeated, as though testing the words for truth. Yes, I said evenly. Blackwood Innovations. You're here today to pitch a collaboration contract worth $50 million. Congratulations, you're pitching it to me. The silence that followed was exquisite. You could almost hear the air shift as understanding settled in. My father sat back down, steepling his fingers under his chin. For a moment, there was no anger, no disbelief, only curiosity, like a chess master evaluating an unexpected move. Well, he said finally, with a faint smile tugging at his lips. It seems my daughter has been keeping secrets. Not secrets, I replied. Just priorities. He chuckled softly, though there was no warmth in the sound. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. I suppose I should congratulate you, then. This, he gestured around the room, is impressive. Thank you, I said coolly. I built it from nothing. You taught me how, after all. He tilted his head, intrigued. Did I? Yes, I said. When you told me I'd never survive without your name. When you refused to invest $1 in my ideas because you thought technology was a hobby for dreamers. When you said no one would ever take me seriously. His jaw tightened slightly, the first visible crack in his calm. Those lessons, I continued, made me stronger than your approval ever could. For a long moment, he said nothing. The lawyers shifted uneasily, pretending to review their notes. Finally, he exhaled and leaned forward. Olivia, he said slowly, business isn't built on emotion. I did what any rational man would do. I invested where there was proof, not fantasy. I met his gaze squarely. Then consider this proof. I tapped a button on the digital screen behind me. Instantly, the wall lit up with a live projection of our company's metrics, revenue graphs climbing exponentially, client portfolios filled with global names, real-time analytics showing growth that outpaced even the largest corporations. The numbers spoke louder than I ever could. My father's expression faltered for just a second, a blink, a small tightening of the lips, but I saw it. That was all I needed. You built all this? He asked quietly. I did, I said. Without your money. Without your influence. Without the Blackwood name, though I kept it hidden in the company title as a reminder of what I'd overcome. A low murmur rippled through his team. My father leaned back again, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Impressive, he murmured. Truly impressive. For a moment, I thought I heard a note of pride in his voice. But then he added, and yet, here you are using the same ruthless precision I taught you. You're your father's daughter after all. The words struck me like a cold wind. I straightened, refusing to let them pierce deeper. No, father, I said softly. I'm not like you. You built empires by breaking people. I built mine by believing in them. The silence that followed was electric. One of the lawyers coughed nervously and glanced at the contract folder in front of him. Mr. Blackwood, he murmured, perhaps we should. My father held up a hand to silence him. His gaze never left mine. So, what happens now? He asked finally. Do you plan to humiliate me in front of my team? Reject my proposal out of revenge? I shook my head slowly. No. I'm not here for revenge. He looked skeptical. Then what do you want? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Respect. That's all I ever wanted from you. But I don't need it anymore. I already earned it, with or without your permission. For the first time, his eyes softened. Just slightly. The man who had once looked at me as a disappointment now looked at me like someone he didn't quite know, someone he might finally understand. He nodded slowly, the faintest shadow of regret crossing his features. Perhaps I was wrong about you, he said quietly. Perhaps, I replied. I reached across the table, picked up the folder containing his firm's proposal, and flipped it open. As for your contract, I said, scanning the first page, I'll review it personally. If it aligns with our company's ethics, we'll proceed. If not, we won't. Simple as that. He smiled faintly, not mockingly this time, but almost proud. Spoken like a true CEO. Like a true Blackwood, I corrected, but not the kind you raised. That earned a real laugh from him, short, genuine, and tinged with something that felt like surrender. As I gathered the documents, my father rose to his feet, gesturing for his lawyers to follow. Before leaving, he paused at the door, turning back to me. You know, he said softly, I always knew you'd do something extraordinary. I just never thought it would be without me. I met his eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw the faintest trace of pride there, not the kind born of ownership, but of realization. You underestimated the wrong person, I said quietly. He smiled, gave a slow nod, and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was deafening. My chest felt tight, not with anger this time, but with release. 10 years of unspoken words had finally found their place. When I turned toward the glass wall overlooking the city, the skyline shimmered like a reflection of my journey, chaotic, beautiful, alive. And for the first time since I was a girl, I felt completely free. The door had barely closed behind my father when the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I could already feel the storm in the air, guilt, confusion, disbelief all running toward me in the form of two people who once thought they knew me better than I knew myself. Olivia. Diane's voice rang sharp across the hall. What the hell was that? I turned slowly, watching her stride into the boardroom, James trailing behind her, his face pale and tight. What was what? I asked evenly, though my pulse thudded quietly in my ears. Don't play games with me, she snapped. This entire thing, the interviews, the humiliation, it was all some twisted performance, wasn't it? Just to get back at us. I leaned against the edge of the table, crossing my arms. If that's how you choose to see it. Her hands flew up in disbelief. You made us look like fools in front of your staff. I met her glare calmly. You did that yourselves, Diane. I didn't make you lie about your experience. I didn't tell you to act entitled in an interview. You did that because you assumed anyone behind that company couldn't possibly be smarter or more successful than you. Diane's jaw tightened, her face flushed red. James stepped in, his tone softer but strained. Liv, come on. You can't seriously expect us to have guessed that you were, this. I repeated quietly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You built a billion-dollar company, Olivia. You changed your name, disappeared, and let us believe you were struggling. You let us talk down to you, let us think we were doing better than you. Why? What was the point? I exhaled slowly, my voice steady. Because I needed to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing. And you both gave me the answer. James frowned, but Diane's expression shifted, not with anger now, but with something more fragile. Doubt. Do you have any idea how it felt, I continued, to sit through dinner after dinner listening to you brag about your careers, your wins, while mocking everything I did? You called me naive. You laughed when I said I was freelancing. You told me to get a real job. You made me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. Diane's lips parted, but she didn't speak. I kept quiet, I said, my tone softening, not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I wanted peace. Because if I'd told you the truth, you wouldn't have celebrated it, you would have competed with it. You would have found a way to turn my success into another contest. The room fell silent. The air hummed faintly from the central vents. Outside, the skyline shimmered in the sunlight, oblivious to the storm unraveling inside. Diane's eyes glistened slightly, just for a moment, before she blinked it away. You think we hated you, she said quietly. But we didn't. We just didn't understand you. That's the problem, I replied. You never tried to. James sank into one of the chairs, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't mean to look down on you, Liv. I really didn't. I guess I was jealous, in a way. You always had courage. You followed your own path while I stayed stuck in Dad's shadow. His confession caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw the boy I'd grown up with, not the competitive brother who measured success in salary brackets, but the kid who used to help me fix my science projects and believed in magic. I smiled faintly. Jealousy looks different on you, James. You hide it behind sarcasm. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Yeah. Guess I learned from the best. The tension broke just slightly, a fragile thread of familiarity weaving its way back into the space between us. But Diane still stood rigid, her pride refusing to bow. So, what now? She asked finally. You're going to fire us? Throw us out of your shiny building and watch us squirm? I hesitated, then walked closer to her. For a moment, we stood face to face, the successful CEO and the sister who had once called her a failure. No, I said quietly. I'm not firing you. You were never hired in the first place. Her eyes narrowed. You're enjoying this? I shook my head. Not at all. You think this is satisfying? Watching my own family crumble under the weight of their pride? No, Diane. I'd trade every headline, every dollar, every ounce of success if it meant you'd seen me, really seen me, before all of this. Her expression faltered. The fight in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something raw and uncertain. Do you remember, I asked softly, when I told you I was building something special? You laughed. You said, Olivia, the world doesn't run on dreams. But it does. That's the only thing that ever made it move. Her breath hitched. For a second, she looked like she might cry, but pride, that old Blackwood curse, held her back. I turned away, moving toward the floor-to-ceiling window that stretched across the far wall. The city below shimmered like liquid silver, the streets pulsing with life. I didn't build Blackwood Innovations for revenge, I said, my voice low but steady. I built it because I wanted to create something that mattered. Something that didn't rely on old names or family influence. Something honest. James rose slowly from his chair. And you did. You built something incredible. I don't even have words for it, Liv. I turned to him, meeting his eyes. Then prove it. Not with apologies, but with effort. If you want a place here, you'll earn it just like everyone else. No shortcuts, no privileges. He nodded immediately, his voice firm. Deal. Diane looked between us, her jaw tight. You'd actually make your own brother and sister apply like strangers? I'd make anyone apply like a stranger, I said. Because family should never be an excuse for mediocrity. The room went quiet again. Diane's eyes flickered with anger and then, finally, defeat. She looked down at the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe that's why you succeeded and we didn't. Something in my chest softened. I walked to her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't look up, but she didn't pull away either. It's not too late to start over, I said quietly. You both have potential, you always did. You just buried it under the need to impress everyone else. Diane finally met my gaze, her eyes glistening. I don't know if I can work for you, Olivia. I don't know if I can take orders from my little sister. Then don't, I said softly. Work with me. Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her face. With you? Yes, I said, nodding. You're brilliant, Diane. You know law better than anyone I've met. James understands finance better than half my analysts. You both have what this company needs, just not the arrogance it doesn't. For the first time since they walked in, silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt cleansing. James smiled faintly. So this is what forgiveness looks like. I laughed softly. Forgiveness isn't given. It's built. Like trust. He nodded, understanding. Diane hesitated, then sighed, that deep, reluctant kind of sigh that comes when pride finally steps aside. All right, she said. Then let's build it. For the first time in years, we stood together not as rivals, not as wounded siblings, but as something closer to what we once were, a family trying to find its way back. I looked out the window again, the city glowing beneath the afternoon sun. The world had changed, and so had we. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't just the woman who had built an empire. I was a sister again. The following weeks felt like a strange dream, one that blurred the line between past and present. My siblings were now part of my world, but not as ghosts from the life I left behind. They were learning, humbling themselves, rediscovering what purpose meant outside of competition and comparison. At first, the adjustment was awkward. Diane's sharp legal instincts clashed with the fluid creativity of our innovation teams, while James struggled to navigate the fast-paced rhythm of startup culture. But for the first time, they didn't quit. They listened, adapted, grew. And as I watched them evolve, I felt something inside me soften, something that had been locked away for far too long. Every morning, I arrived early at the office, walking through the sleek corridors lined with glass and light. There was something sacred about watching my company, our company now, come alive. People greeted me not with fear, but with respect. I had built an empire not from money or legacy, but from conviction. One evening, long after most employees had left, I stood by the panoramic window overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly into the horizon, reflecting off the river like a trail of gold. Behind me, footsteps approached softly. Still here. James's voice broke the silence, warm and familiar. I turned, smiling faintly. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. He walked over, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Then you're definitely still my sister. I remember those nights, you staring at your laptop while everyone else was at parties. I laughed softly, taking the cup. Some things never change. He leaned against the railing beside me, sipping his drink. You know, I never realized how hard you had it back then. I used to think you were just stubborn, always trying to prove something. But now I see you weren't proving anything, you were building something that didn't exist yet. His voice was full of quiet admiration, and for the first time, I saw no jealousy there. Just pride. I smiled. Took you long enough to figure that out. He chuckled. Hey, I'm learning. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe below us. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was standing alone at the top. The next day, Diane called a team meeting, her idea, surprisingly. When I arrived, she was already in the middle of a presentation, explaining a new legal framework for our upcoming international expansion. Her tone was confident, her ideas bold but practical. When she finished, the room erupted in quiet applause. Even I couldn't help but smile. After the meeting, she approached me privately. You were right, she said softly. This place, it's different. People actually care here. They're not just chasing power. That was always the goal, I said. To build something that mattered. She nodded, eyes glistening slightly. I used to think success was about control, winning arguments, proving people wrong. But now I see it's about creation. You taught me that. I reached out and squeezed her hand gently. No, I said. You just had to remember it. There was peace in her smile, fragile, but real. Over the next few months, the company flourished even more. Projects expanded globally, new partnerships formed, and Blackwood Innovations became a symbol of integrity in an industry known for its ruthlessness. The irony wasn't lost on me. A family once defined by pride had built a culture rooted in humility and innovation. And then one morning, everything came full circle. A courier arrived at my office with a letter, not an email, not a message, but an actual handwritten envelope sealed in dark blue wax. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father. I sat at my desk for several minutes before opening it. The paper was thick, the ink written in his familiar, steady hand. Olivia. I've spent my life building empires and calling that love. I see now that I was wrong. You've done what I never could, built something that breathes, something that gives more than it takes. I am proud of you, though I don't deserve to say it. Perhaps someday, you'll allow an old man to learn from his daughter. Blackwood. I read it twice, my eyes blurring. 4 years, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally earn my father's respect, and when it came, it wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, heavy with grace. I placed the letter in my desk drawer and sat back, exhaling a long, trembling breath. That moment, more than any deal or award, felt like the true victory. That evening, I called my father. He answered after the second ring. Olivia. His voice was softer than I remembered. I got your letter, I said. I meant every word. I know. There was a long pause, not awkward, but heavy with years of unsaid things. Finally, I said, how about dinner? Just us this time. He chuckled lightly. No lawyers. No board members. No, I smiled. Just family. I'd like that, he said quietly. And just like that, the wall that had stood between us for decades began to crumble. A week later, we met at a small restaurant tucked into a quiet corner of the city, the same one he used to take us to when we were kids after big milestones. The years had changed him. His once commanding presence now felt gentler, humbled by time. Over dinner, he asked questions, real ones. About the company, about my life, about my dreams. And for the first time, I didn't have to defend my answers. When I told him that Diane and James were now part of the leadership team, he smiled. Seems I was wrong about all of you, he admitted. I laughed softly. That's one way to put it. By the time we left the restaurant, the city was glowing with night lights. My father hugged me, a real embrace, not the half-hearted kind from years ago. And in that moment, something healed. Something old, something invisible, but deeply rooted. As I stood on the sidewalk afterward, the cool night air brushing against my face, I looked up at the skyline, the same skyline that once towered over a girl with nothing but ambition. Now, it felt like an old friend. Blackwood Innovations wasn't just a company anymore. It was a legacy not of wealth, but of resilience, of love rediscovered, of bridges rebuilt where pride once stood. And as I walked toward my car, the city lights reflecting in the glass, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes, success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about showing them what's possible. Because in the end, I didn't just build an empire. I rebuilt a family. And that was the real victory.